All right, so welcome everybody to this second DemoTrans online meeting. So DemoTrans is actually a Horizon Europe project. And in this Horizon Europe project, we are trying to study the economy, the society, by looking at various angles of the democracy and trying to reinforce basically on an evidence-based way the democracy and everything that deals with that. DemoTrans is a project that is run by a couple of universities. So I'm from the University of Leuven. We do have also Benny Gijs from the University of Bergen. We do have also people from Utrecht University, from Charles University on board, as well as Tax Justice Network. And together we constitute this DemoTrans Horizon Europe project. And in DemoTrans, we do have a few research lines. The main aim of DemoTrans is to do very good research, state-of-the-art research that we can use later on for policy making. And that's why we have similar meetings as today, in which we try to look at our research and trying to focus on what did we learn, but also trying to bridge towards policymakers. And that's why we're very happy with a few policymakers among you, just to bridge our research and to disseminate it, but also to get feedback on the research so that it's really as useful as possible on policy making. And in the research, we do have 4 research packages. One of them is trying to look at accountable corporations. How can we make corporations more accountable? Second one is on corporate power. So what can we do about it? What are the insights that are there? And we do focus also on the institutional legitimacy. So how to improve this. And finally, also a topic on lobbying, in which we try to look at all of those angles of lobbying, sustainability, social sustainability, inequality, etc. DemoTrans is already on its way. So we started September 2022. So it's about 1 year and a bit that we're working on that. And in this period of time, we wrote about 11 policy briefs. So policy briefs are, for the DemoTrans Consortium, one of the main ways to communicate with a broader audience, to reach out to policymakers. And as you can see here, the policy briefs, they are touching upon a lot of topics, for instance, on the use of regional products and representation in the European Parliament, about policy reforms in the European Union, about municipal mergers, about politically connected firms, about green public procurement, about multinational corporations, profit shifting, etc. I definitely encourage you to go to our website, to have a look on the website, and to download each of the policy briefs. They try to be as concise as possible, so they typically have no more than 3-4 pages, so that very quickly you see what is the research about, what did we learn, and what can we do with the research. Next to policy briefs and research papers, we also organize a lot of activities. There was, for instance, recently a workshop on lobbying in Utrecht University. We organized an online workshop on public procurement. So this was the first one. Today is the second online workshop. We have also a conference on tax avoidance organized in Prague University. And very soon there will be a workshop organized in Leuven on democracy at the local level. March 14 and 15. So you're definitely welcome. Germa Bell will be one of our keynote speakers. So it will be very nice to meet all of you there and to join us at this workshop. To stay in touch, you can definitely visit our website. The website tries to present the project briefly on what do we do, what are the objectives, what is the expected impact, but also who are the partners, what are the different outputs. On the website, you can also find the link, for instance, to the news. So what kind of new activities will we undertake? What kind of new policy briefs, for instance, do we have? But also the Twitter account, for instance, is quite active. Takis is handling the account, trying to show what do we do in the project. So definitely follow us on Twitter such that you can stay in touch. But also, if you don't have Twitter or you don't like Twitter because of some reasons, you can follow us on LinkedIn, where we try to showcase also the same type of feeds as we do on Twitter. So today is our second second online seminar. The main aim of the seminar is to disseminate, as I said, our research. So there are many papers from the DemoTrans consortium, many colleagues here also from the DemoTrans consortium that work with local government politics on fiscal policies, for instance. And then we will record it. We will also distribute it through our website, on the YouTube channel, etc., such that we can have a lasting impact on what did we learn, and that people can also redo and revisit our discussions that we have today. In the first part of the presentation, we have 10-minute talks by Takis, who's going to discuss a little bit what are the different trade-offs in local government and how does it work with expenditure composition. Next, we go to Giovanna D'Inverno, who's going to discuss a little bit about the sustainable budgeting and the fiscal balance. And then we go over to Germa Bell about the remunicipalization and the changing prices. And finally, we go to Wander de Munk on municipal mergers and budgetary consequences. And then we do have the honor to have a colleague from the European Parliament among us, Visalis Margoras. I hope I pronounced it well. So he's also working within the European Parliament on regional development. So a lot of topics that are here. He will open the floor. So we don't take questions unless there are really clarifications needed during the presentations, but we have the discussion afterwards. And then in the second part, after a short break, we do have about 45 minutes to go deeper on populistic voting. What are the differences in populistic voting? That's presented by Lorenzo Catalano. Next, we do have Benny Gijs, who's going to discuss a little bit about elected politicians and public employees. So what are the direct and indirect effects of passive representation? And then finally, we have Dieter Stiers, who's going to present a paper on the neighborhood effects in economic voting. And then again, we do have a discussion on the topics and to see how can we learn from that. So without further delay, I would like to hand over the floor to Takis to show and to take us to the presentations.
Great, thank you very much, Christoph. I think you can see my share screen, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, let me press this button. Full screen. Okay, so thank you very much for all of you for being here for our second online workshop, DemoTrans. So I will begin this session with a paper we have written with Christoph regarding the composition of local governments' budgets. I will start with the motivation behind our paper and then move on the brief outline of the theoretical background. And afterwards, I will go through the data and methodologies of our work. And in the end, we're going to discuss briefly our empirical results along with a short discussion about policy implications. So the motivation. Our motivation comes from the fact that fiscal decentralization reforms have grown significantly over the last decades. As fiscal decentralization, we define the transfer of power from central to subnational forms of government, and it usually takes the form of more autonomy in tax collection, more fiscal transfers from regional and state governments to local dimensions of governments, the introduction of some kind of fiscal discipline that controls deficits and debts, and so on and so forth. After the crisis, after the Eurozone crisis, we observed that the finances of local governments in many countries became a critical source of destabilization, which in turn paved the way for more austerity and the introduction of deficit control budget rules. However, what is crucial in this process, and especially in democratic states, is that horizontal budget cuts are not always politically and socially feasible. More often, we observe governments making changes in the composition of their budgets, changes that reflect their political and ideological priorities and commitments, rather than a horizontal budget cut affecting every policy area equally in their budgets. In this study, in this paper, we focus on the 300 Flemish municipalities of Belgium. Flanders has a high degree of fiscal autonomy. Since 2014, a new fiscal framework has been introduced into the region, the policy and management cycle, that requires all municipalities to effectively run a balanced budget. So in this context, we explore two research questions. The first asks if we observe clusters of municipalities having similar budget compositions. And the second research question explores the potential economic, social, demographic, political factors that might predict these cluster memberships. Let's move on now to the theoretical background of our work. In the literature, we usually find two broad theoretical traditions in the analysis of fiscal behavior of local governments. The first tradition is rooted in public choice theory, the seminal works of Musgrave and Samuelson on public goods. They conceptualize the production of public goods as the response of government to voters' preferences, whereas later Thibault proposed a model for local governments, assuming that individuals, the voters, are freely to move between jurisdictions, between municipal jurisdictions, and thus choosing the municipality that best reflects their own preferences. Now, within this tradition, in the 70s and 80s, we observed the emergence of two research streams. The first utilizing the median voter model, where we see that the quantity of public goods reflects the preferences of the median income voter, and another research stream concentrating on varieties of models of utility maximization. What we mean by that is that an actor, either bureaucrats or politicians or an administration in a municipality, aims to maximize political utility by manipulating budget composition. The second tradition, the second theoretical tradition, is rooted in sociology and political science and their intersection with the field of political economy. This scholarship emphasizes the role of government expenditures in legitimizing class structure in capitalist societies and facilitating the process of capital accumulation and profit creation. As we see these dimensions of work in the work of O'Connor and Strick. Within this school, we highlight two approaches that we believe are relevant to our own discussion within this study. The first approach is the partisan approach, in which political parties compete for votes, promising political reforms and measures and actions that best serve the interests of the social groups that they represent. And an extension of this approach is the contagion from the left hypothesis, in which opposition parties influence the policy behavior of ruling parties. All in all, the literature is vast and provides empirically mixed results with respect to the factors that explain local government expenditure variation. Of course, the theoretical background is not without limitations. First of all, the analysis of the composition of budgets and the distributional conflicts and trade-offs between expenditures categories is still understudied. It is still not clear which expenditure components are sacrificed in the design and implementation of a budget, either under an austerity rule or an austerity program or under a balanced budget rule. Furthermore, existing literature seems to underestimate the potential effects of the political and ideological biases that we observe in the electoral basis. And the studies that we have read and we have analyzed, they exclusively focus on the political affiliation of elected officials instead of the political and ideological position of their own communities. Moving on now to data and methodology, the data and the methodology we have used for this study, we exploit three sources of data. The annual budget accounts at a very disaggregated level of 149 expenditure categories. We utilize the comprehensive data set from the City Monitor offered by the Flemish government. This data set provides a huge amount of data on socioeconomic variables and data from the Manifesto project. Here we take estimates of left to right index for political parties based on a text analysis of their political manifestos. Now, methodologically, we follow two approaches. The first is that we apply a clustering algorithm to identify the clusters of municipalities that have similar budget compositions. And the second approach is that we run a binary logistic regression with fixed effects, using as a dependent variable the cluster memberships of the previous step, and as explanatory variables a combination of demographic, socioeconomic, fiscal, urban, and political factors. And in this slide, you can see the descriptive statistics of our variables. Now moving on to the results. Sorry. Okay. So our results suggest that the municipalities in Flanders form three distinct clusters with respect to their similarities in the composition of their budgets. The first cluster, which we name elderly-centric care, tends to prioritize social care services for the elderly, sacrificing resources for mobility, education, and waste management. The second cluster, which we name balanced education and social care, tends to trade off primary education, mobility, waste management for social care services for the elderly. And the third cluster, which we name administrative and urban development, sacrifices both policy areas of care services for elderly and prime education in order to support administration services, mobility, safety, and urban planning. Now moving quickly to the regression results, I will concentrate on four remarks. The first is that population and income seems to have negligible effects on the likelihood to observe a budget composition pattern. Second, the political and ideological position of the electoral base matters for budget priorities. So if we, for example, in one unit shift of the political position of local electorates to the right raises the probability to observe municipalities that prioritize caregiving services for the elderly by 64%. The third remark is that there is a significant mismatch between the age structure of local communities and the funding of public services closer to their profiles. And the last remark is that the foreign origin population is an important factor for municipalities to divert resources towards caregiving services, a result that is also consistent with a well-documented observation in the literature. To the discussion. Now, to summarize, our study has found evidence of an important variation between municipalities regarding the decision of local governments to favor specific expenditure categories with more budgetary resources. Although our findings are linked to Flanders, we believe that we offer insights to policymakers for formulating fiscal policies and institutional reforms that mitigate the size of, first of all, intergenerational biases, and secondly, of political and ideological biases with respect to the provision of public goods. And two policy recommendations. First, we're reevaluating the distribution of responsibilities for critical public goods like education, social care, between local, regional, and central dimensions of governments. And second, introducing new forms of democratic participation for those groups, for those social groups that are underrepresented in the budgetary structure. Thank you very much. I'm 2 minutes over the target.
Thank you very much, Takis, for this presentation. I suggest that we don't take questions now, but that we go immediately to the second presenter, who's Giovanna D'Inverno, because of course a few of the papers they connect to each other, and then it might be more fruitful for the discussion later on. Giovanna, the floor is yours. Your audio is still muted, Giovanna. It's like the classical mistake in online seminars. Huh?
Okay, now you can hear me. So good afternoon,
no, the screen
everyone.
disappeared, Giovanna.
Moment.
That's a second classical mistake. Perfect,
okay,
thanks.
now I guess you are ready to go. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. Today I'm going to present a joint work with Christophe De Witt and Francesco Vidoli, and in a nutshell, what we're going to see is whether the enforcement of a budget balance rule has affected the efficiency of local governments, and if so, through which policy instruments. So why this work? As also Takis was mentioning, local governments over decades have been facing contrasting needs. So on the one hand, being the closest form of governments to the citizens, they are the one in charge of providing most of the public services. So to provide services which are tailored to the need of the citizens. On the other hand, though, local governments have been facing increasingly limited amount of resources and therefore budget restrictions imposed by higher forms of governments, for example, at regional level. And this situation has been further amplified, for example, due to the COVID pandemic, so that meeting the requirements of fiscal sustainability will be increasingly difficult. Now, as a response, local government can play with different leverages, with different levels of rigidity with respect to the time frame. For example, they could cut the level of expenditure, they could reduce the service provision, or for example, they can increase taxation. Now, of course, any of these leverages might affect the efficiency of local governments, meaning how well they can deal with the resources in providing the services, and also equity. So to which extent the service provision is aligned with the actual local needs. Therefore, what do we do in this paper? We investigate municipal behaviors in reacting to the policy and management cycle, which is a new budget balance rule that has been enforced from 2014 in the Flemish region of Belgium. So this policy is very important because it replaced a much weaker system enforced before. And we provide an integrated analysis to answer 3 research questions. So first of all, if and how does the policy affect efficiency? So, and if so, can we find the heterogeneous effect across the local governments that has been found the most inefficient? And if so, if they manage to recover their inefficiency, which are the leverages that they use to recover the inefficiency? So moving to the institutional framework, we will use data referring to 307 Flemish municipalities over the period 2006-2016. So you can notice that we will observe 3 years after the implementation of the policy rule. And as for the data set, we look at the total expenditure. Then as municipal output, so as a proxy of public services, we look across all the functions. And we specify a proxy for the services and the actual need. Okay, so and all these outputs cover more than 90% of the total expenditure. Also, we use as control variable the average income, the number of inhabitants, and the residential sale prices. And as a proxy of fiscal efforts, we use the local income tax and property tax, which together sum up to more than 80% of the local fiscal revenues. Now, how do we proceed methodologically? So first of all, we want to address the first question. So in order to estimate the impact of the reform, we want to first measure the efficiency. How do we measure cost efficiency of local governments? We use a stochastic frontier model, which helps us in measuring how well local governments are transforming expenditure into service provision, but also how well service provision is aligned with the actual local demand. So how supply meets the demand. Then we want to cluster our group of our municipalities into two main groups. So we want to distinguish a group of municipalities that have been performing relatively well over time, and this will be our comparison group, as opposed to another group of municipalities which will be found inefficient and therefore representing the main targets of the reform. And lastly, we use a difference in differences approach, so to compare these two groups of municipalities and check the impact of the reform before and after its implementation. Then we explore across the inefficient local governments whether there has been heterogeneous effect, and therefore we run again a functional data clustering approach to identify whether we can find the specific patterns among those group of municipalities. And then through a difference in differences approach, we can see whether among these groups, before and after the implementation of the reform, which is the leading group driving the result. Finally, to see which are the levers that has been pulled by the municipalities if found recovering the inefficiency, we use a logistic model. Moving to the findings, this table reports the cost efficiency estimates. So we can see all the components related to the service provision across the different municipal functions. And here we see that on average, the efficiency has been reported at 89.65, where 100 corresponds to the top performance. So we can notice that on average, across the local municipalities observed in this panel time, there is room to improve efficiency. Also, I would like to draw your attention on the table below, where we have the list of variables used as a proxy for local provision across the municipal functions, and on the right, the variables that is being used as instruments as the local needs corresponding to the provided services. Just to give you an example, we can read along the line of culture that as local provision, we consider the number of items in the public libraries that have been matched as local needs with the people, the library borrowers. Okay, so this is the idea. Now, once we have measured the cost efficiency, we want to cluster and see whether there are common patterns across groups of municipalities. So on the left panel, you can see many lines. Each line corresponds to the municipality under analysis. And as you can see, the top lines, the red ones, correspond to the most efficient municipalities over the time of the analysis. Therefore, this group of red lines will be representing our comparison group. All the other municipalities that resulted more inefficient over time, so showing a structural underperformance over time, will represent the main treated group of our analysis, so where the policy was targeted at most. Performing the difference in difference analysis, so we look at the coefficient of main interest, and it is positive and significant. This means that the budget rule had, on average, across these municipalities, a positive effect. Now, what we want to explore is what is driving this positive effect. That's why we ran again a functional cluster analysis just among the inefficient municipalities. As we can see, the orange line corresponds to municipalities that over time, after the policy implementation, has improved their efficiency, while this group of red lines represent the municipalities whose efficiency after the policy implementation, so after restricting the budget balance, has been worsening their performance. All in all, however, if we measure altogether the impact of the policy, we see that the average effect that we found in the previous step is due to the fact that the positive trend outweighs the negative trend of the municipalities that didn't manage to recover their inefficiency. To conclude, we can explore which are the policy leverages of local governments. So our main focus would be on the income and property tax, then the number of services presented, and then the expenditure. And we see that the main leverage that the local governments who managed to improve their performance was through raising income tax. While actually using property tax would have exerted the opposite effect, in fact. So, and also, interestingly, we notice that the ones who manage to recover their efficiency are the ones presenting the lowest level of inefficiency. So it's easy for municipalities to recover their inefficiency if they start from a lower level of underperformance, while it becomes more difficult for those who have more important structural levels of underperformance. So to sum up, what we found in this work is that policies like the budget rule constraint on average pushes inefficient municipalities to perform better. However, this is not the same for all the municipalities under analysis, but rather there has been a group that improved its performance over time after the policy implementation. And it was the case because of the increasing the level of the income tax. While we don't observe remarkable differences with respect to property tax or expenditure or service provision. And to conclude, in terms of policy recommendation, we remarked that policies promoting fiscal sustainability might not be enough to guarantee a fair distribution of fiscal effort, and to prevent mismanagement of resources, it's important to promote fiscal incentives at local level inside of one-size-fits-all restrictions. So if you're curious and you want to read more detail, please check our paper on the European Journal of Operational Research and on the policy brief on the webpage of DemoTrans. So this is all. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Giovanna, also for staying in time. I would like to go immediately to Germa Bell from the University of Autónoma de Barcelona on remunicipalization and changing prices in local public services. Germa, the floor is yours.
I'm gonna share my screen with Germa's presentation. Germa, the floor is yours.
Your audio is still muted, Germa.
Yeah, sorry about that. I did eat my time with that, so I will take into account. So this is Germà, as you saw, Bell from Barcelona, and I think the college is gonna manage my PowerPoint. So no more. Thank you for invitation. No more waiting for the go next slide. So we have changed the title. Actually, we don't evaluate the effect of remunicipalization. As I will explain, we compare the effects of remunicipalization versus privatization. So we go now to that. Can we move? Oh yeah. So there's been a lot of reform in the last 40, 50 years in local government. We will talk about it in Leuven in a few weeks from now. Some reforms have been conducted in the provision dimension, affecting the jurisdiction which is responsible for services. This might have been amalgamation, usually forced. The project is close to studying amalgamation, and also alternatively cooperation between municipalities, which is basically voluntary. Although some developments in France and Italy in the last decade have introduced some degree of compulsory application. And then in the production dimension, so who delivers the service, not who is responsible for, but who delivers the service, we've had privatization and remunicipalization. We also have had corporatization, which is taking outside bureaucracy, public delivery, but we are not focused now. We are not going to focus now in that thing. So, and what we know about this thing, okay. So we know a little bit about the effects of amalgamation. We have this meta-literary review published in Public Management Review by Gality and others recently. And about cooperation, we know quite a few things about evidence, and also we know what we do not know, or what we not know enough about. And we also know quite a few things about production. So the effects of privatization, not only the drivers, but also the effects. But there's very little robust evidence on effects of remunicipalization. Actually, I only know a working paper not published, at least not so far, by Simon Porcher and France, actually evaluating the effect of remunicipalization on price changes. So basically, what we have is the effects of privatization versus people doing nothing, no reformers, and remunicipalization, just this single paper. I'm talking about multivariate empirical evidence, and remunicipalization versus non-reformers, meaning people doing nothing. But we are not interested in reformers versus non-reformers. We are interested, and we think this is new, reformers versus reformers. So the idea is that most likely and mostly decision to reform local services is pragmatic. I mean, there's some ideology in there as well. We don't disregard the fact, but it's mostly pragmatic and it's based on disappointment. On the effects of the previous working, the previous performance of the services. So some people get disappointed and then they're public, they go private. Some other people get disappointed, they are private, they go public. Genius, because they are disappointed. This is necessary to understand. What makes them homogeneous is that they are disappointed. So we compare these municipalities that have reacted with a reform to disappointment. And contemporary. So that, I mean, we are not going to do deep in deep because every decision is atomized and might be different shocks, etc. But also because we don't have a proper database. There is not a database on municipalization. For any country, the only one is this public culture in University of Glasgow, and the databases for privatization cases are not exhaustive. So we built our own database for years -1 to +5 of the reform in water, be it privatization or be it municipalization. And no, go before, please. And then we have these 4 hypotheses. First 3 are kind of more core hypotheses. So because there is this disappointment, we think that remunicipalization will be larger when high prices existed for water as a reaction to high prices. There's the literature on price determination of prices. I'm not going to go in deep because it's only 3 minutes and a half left. But there's the supporting literature is in the paper, which is under evaluation. So we think that remunicipalization is going to be more frequent, and municipalities, the higher the previous price. That is going to be more frequent in municipalities with left-wing parties, and here we will distinguish between left from center and extreme left, a distinction that has proven to be useful in previous research. And then that the increase in price will be smaller when there is a remunicipalization, meaning from private to public, than when there is a privatization, meaning from public to private. There's an additional one, which is not core, is that prices will converge because of regulation. No matter whether public or private management, prices will converge because of cost recovery requirements and because efficiency does not seem to be the difference between public and private management. Now we can go. So we have these two models, one of the drivers of the municipalization, which we'll estimate in with a logistic estimation. We have control variables explained and the text and regional dummies, because water is a regional business in Spain, so there might be regional regulations. And then we have a model for the change in the price of water from -1, 0 times 0 being the reform, the year of the reform, and +1 or +4 years, which we define as short-term and long-term effects. Plus T +1, T +4 is the end here. So, and this is the model. We take the past price, control variables, and regional dummies, and control variables and regional dummies, of course, are based on existing literature. Let's go, please. Now, this is a logistic regression, and then what we find is that both factors, previous price of water and ideological orientation, contribute to remunicipalization. Plainly speaking, the higher the price before, the more the remunicipalization instead of privatization, and rather than privatization, and the more the left the political party, the more frequent privatization. This was the municipalization. Excuse me. This was not the main. The main target was the next one about prices. And what we have here is that no matter how you enter the variables, no matter how you enter the period, this is long term. Short term is about the same. Long term is more interesting from our point of view. Remunicipalization is linked to lower increases of prices than privatization. And this is robust to any variable control we use, to any regional dummy, I mean everything. But now, interestingly, we see that there are some outliers in the sample. We have 50-something remunicipalizations, 80-something privatizations, and we have 70 municipalities where price for water was almost zero, close to zero before the reform. Most of those municipalities did privatize, so that we run again the regression of prices by excluding those outliers. We define the outliers on statistical terms, of course. And the next slide, without the outliers, meaning those municipalities that before the reform had a close to zero prices, the difference of change of prices between the municipalization and privatization here. So this difference is heavily depending on a few municipalities where prices were close to zero and they were mostly publicly under public management. What do we get about from this? Next one and last one. Yeah, is that, yeah, as we did expect, price grows led with remunicipalization than with privatization. But this is caused by the small subset of privatizing municipalities, where prices were abnormally low. If we do take away those outliers, then changing prices after reform is not significantly different. This confirms what we have seen in waste, is that privatization can be used to increase users' payment and to reduce budgetary subsidies. And this is consistent with the existing evidence that says that private management of water has higher prices than public management of water. And this might not be related to costs. This might be related to coverage of costs by users' payment. So in this way, and this is my final remark, we think that we disentangle a little bit the topic of having consistently higher prices with private water, but having not worse efficiency with private water. So there's something in between, and we think that in between different prices and similar efficiency is that with private guys, municipalities spend less budgetary money. So that's it. Next slide, I don't need to discuss about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Germa, for this presentation. Next, we go to Wander de Munk, who's going to discuss the municipal mergers, so very closely related to the previous topics and the budgetary consequences of that. Wander, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Wander de Munk. I'm a PhD researcher at the Public Governance Institute of KU Leuven. And last year I was involved in two parallel research projects, the one related to municipal amalgamations in Flanders and the other related to the potential reform of the municipal fund of Flanders. So these two research projects, they are somewhat intertwined to a certain extent, which I'll go on about later. And where they come together is in a small conceptual exercise that we did as a result of these two projects, where we looked at how can we measure the centrality of municipalities as an indicator for an expense pressure of municipalities based on which the municipal fund could be redistributed if municipal amalgamations were to occur on a large scale in Flanders. So we again stick to the Flemish context here. But first, some more context on these two research projects separately. So the municipal fund is, apart from local tax bases, the largest income base for municipalities in Flanders. And the goal of this fund is to ensure the basic operation of municipalities given intermunicipal differences in tax bases, but also in expense pressures. Now, it's a transfer of money from the region to the municipalities. And the criteria that are used to capture these intermunicipal differences, they can be open criteria, such as criteria that measure the amount of social deprivation in a municipality. But some of them, and this is the thing I will go on about in more detail later, are closed pre-allocations. So there's a classification of municipalities where some municipalities are classified as a central city, and these central cities receive a pre-allocated budget directly to them. But this is a rather contested classification because it is based on data from the 1990s, and there's no legislation foreseen for this classification to be updated. And as such, some smaller towns that do not qualify as central cities have gone to court actually to contest this pre-allocation scheme. So that is something that is important for later, because a reform of this funding scheme is imposing itself, especially as to how we measure what cities or what municipalities qualify as central cities. Now, on the other hand, you have municipal amalgamations, which is a discussion that has gained more traction in Flanders in recent years. The reason being that in the current and previous legislative period, they have been stimulated financially by the Flemish region, and some of them have been occurring here and there in a bottom-up manner, meaning that municipalities were free to choose who to merge with, and there was no framework as to limit partners in municipal mergers, so to say. So these are the mergers that happened in the previous legislative period. These are the ones that are going on right now and will effectively take place in 2025. Now, what a lot of these mergers have in common is that they are rather anti-urban in nature. And so they tend to be rural or suburban municipalities that merge with each other, become larger in terms of population, but not necessarily in central service provision. And here you can already see the parallels with the municipal funding schemes, which uses measures of centrality to decide whether or not a municipality should be reimbursed more or less. And when it comes to these two parallel developments, they're often also mentioned in the same breath in the media, both by regional and local policymakers. So what we did is a small conceptual exercise to see to what extent a recalibration of this classification scheme of central cities may be affected by different constellations of municipalities. And with constellations, I'm referring to different potential merging or amalgamation scenarios for Flanders. So the research question here is to find out the preferred measure of centrality using either a simple and easily updatable measure, for example, or a more complex measure of centrality, and seeing to what extent they still capture the amount of central service provision from municipalities if those municipalities were to amalgamate in the future. So our methodology is presented schematically here. And what we did is we ranked municipalities based on a range of indicators. The most simple one, and I will only discuss the extreme cases, so the most simple one being a purely population-based indicator, where, for example, the largest municipality has the largest rank and therefore would be qualified as a central city, and smaller municipalities would not be ranked as such. So such a very simple indicator, but then also a more complex and harder to update indicator that takes into account different central services at the local level. And we did this for the current municipalities, but also for two hypothetical amalgamation scenarios, so an urban amalgamation scenario and an anti-urban amalgamation scenario. The rankings of municipalities in each of these scenarios we compared with a benchmark ranking based on a previous study that very comprehensively looked at the central service provision of municipalities in Flanders, and we used that as a benchmark to assess the quality of these different indices. Now, in terms of results, we found actually very clear results, as you can see. So what this graph shows is the discrepancy between the classification of on the one hand, our population-based indicator, and on the other hand, our composite central service indicator for the different scenarios. And what you see, there's a huge discrepancy between the population-based indicator and the composite service provision indicator, even when we just stick to the current municipalities. But if you look at the amalgamation scenarios, also the composite central service provision indicator there's a little margin of error on that increases if the amount of amalgamations also increase. Now, this is just a general overview of the results, but just to have a look at how these translate spatially. This is a map where basically the more red a municipality is, so these are hypothetical municipalities, the larger the discrepancy with the actual central service provision, and this is the comparison with the population-based indicator. And what we see is that typically suburbs of large cities such as Ghent, Brussels, or Antwerp tend to be overestimated in their central service provision when we just use population as a measure of central service provision, which makes a lot of sense because maybe these suburbs, they house a lot of people, but they don't necessarily have the amenities to qualify as a central city. And then on the other hand, the actual central cities, so most of which are indicated either in white or in blue even, which means that these cities are underestimated in their central service provision if we use a population-based indicator. If you use a composite central service indicator, then we see that these discrepancies are smaller, so all central cities are correctly estimated in terms of their central service provision, but still suburban municipalities of large cities tend to be overestimated in their central service provision, even when using a more complex indicator than just population. So in terms of this specific exercise, what we can learn from this is that the advantages of a more complex indicator to measure centrality, and so to qualify cities as central cities, meaning that they would receive more money from the municipal fund, basically, far outweigh the advantages of a more simple and, for example, easily updatable population-based indicator. And this is especially the case when amalgamations become more widespread. But of course, this is for now limited to the Flemish context. And then on a more general note, if we think more conceptually, what municipal amalgamations in general tend to do is they tend to efface intermunicipal differences, which, for example, in funding schemes are accounted for, or intermunicipal differences in central service provision, at least, but not to the extent that most centrality indicators would suggest. So centrality indicators would suggest that these differences are even smaller than they still actually are. And in order to draw a more general conclusion from that, still, what this actually means is that if we look at funding schemes and if we look at the changing characteristics of municipalities, be it in the amount of services they offer and the evolution they make in this respect throughout the years, or be it in terms of their spatial configuration, so whether they extend their territory and internalize or externalize the central services that they offer. When changing funding schemes occur, we should always take into account these evolutions in municipalities' characteristics, because they are inextricably linked. We should especially do so at times of reforms of these funding schemes, but also when large-scale municipal configuration exercises take place, for example, in case of amalgamations. So thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Wander. So we've seen now 4 exciting presentations, so thanks a lot to all the authors. We run a little bit out of time, but that's not a real problem. I guess we can eat a little bit of the break such that we have sufficient time for discussion. And I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Maragall to open the discussion and to link a little bit the presentations towards your perspective as a policymaker, as a member, as a person who works in the parliament. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I mean, these are all very interesting and very in-depth research papers. I mean, I remember, they remind me very much my own years as a PhD student, and these are all very much topics that are debated within Europe and out of them, the borders of Flanders or the regions that you take into account. So many, all of them are constitute very interesting case studies. Just a generic question I would like to have to all of you in terms of methodology is, if, I mean, you take a lot of data into account, cost and prices and all that. One question is in terms of qualitative analysis, if you also kind of do any interviews, if you kind of take public perceptions into account as well, for example, in questions of effectiveness, or what you would privatization or remunicipalization, if there is any kind of strong public tendencies on that. The issue of also, I mean, in terms of spending, I would like, I mean, what we tend, well, for example, I would take the European Commission as an example to simplify a few things. What we tend to see, for instance, is that we also have this problem with the budget within the European Union. Budget goes down, and we have to do more with less. I mean, this is the trend now, and there is a fight, an internal fight for resources. So within the different institutions, the different directorate generals, which would be the different kind of services. There is a huge fight going on for who gets what. And what we tend to see, for example, is that there are some kind of variables, but we know, for instance, that agriculture, DG Agri, agriculture policy will be there. So no matter we agree or disagree on, whether we should fund it or not, this is like a holy cow, a sacred, a sacred envelope for many of the member states. So we know that 1/3 of the money will be there. Both for political reasons, but also for historical reasons, because since the beginning of the European Union, agricultural policy was very, very important. So I would like to ask in your research whether you kind of came across this kind of institutional dimension, and even the bureaucratic dimension, if we can call it like that, within your own fields. Then, I mean. Efficiency, big questions there, Giovanna. I mean, I would be very interesting to, I mean, you in terms of terminology, do you kind of go through this term by taking into account cost efficiency, or you take other variables? I mean, the whole debate of efficiency and inefficiency is huge. We have to deal with it, in all European policies, and we have huge debates with the European Court of Auditors. I don't know if you take auditing also into account, but for us, it's always huge debate. We have within every committee of regional development, we have European Court of Auditors being invited sometimes, and people are going out of their own, habits and manners, and you get lively kind of debates on anything which is related to efficiency and cost, in inefficiency. So the measuring, I mean, huge questions about that, and a very interesting paper. I would be more than happy to explore more on the topic. The balanced budget, that you mentioned, that it may lead to certain, a better results if they manage to stabilize their budget and all that. A question I have there is whether it is linked also to issues of governance, of good governance. So, for example, what we tend to see in cohesion policy is that regions that have managed to get a very good degree or a high degree of good governance, a bureaucracy that works and delivers, a bureaucracy that doesn't have corruption or whatever, even within budget constraints, they tend to deliver. Because they work better, they have managed to work better, they don't have corruption pressures or what have you. So, it's much more easier to deliver even within a lower budget. So again, the question, I mean, the good governance question is something that comes up in many of the policies that we deal with. And especially regional policy, cohesion policy, it has been a big kind of debate that may kind of add more to your research as well. On the question of water, again, another big debate, privatization or municipalization. I would be interested if, very logical kind of conclusions there. I would be interested to hear a bit more about the generic picture. Where are we standing at the moment? I mean, do municipalities go mostly for municipalization, or they would go for privatization? Is it half and half? Or there is a trend to kind of go, a majoritarian trend somewhere. And the mergers, again, very interesting, very much related to the cost idea. I was really surprised to hear that, the trend is strong in rural areas. If I understood correctly, Vander, that they go into that, and that's really very interesting, because in rural areas you tend to have more population that stays there for the whole lives, but they tend to kind of identify a lot more with the local structures. So therefore, anytime, in many other countries, debates that we had to merge municipalities were very difficult in this kind of context, because people were saying, no, I belong to my village and to my rural area, and this is where the town hall where I always used to go. We don't like the people at the next village and what have you. So it's actually probably this is a kind of a case study that may be very different for its own internal reasons when it comes to kind of do a comparative analysis with other countries. So yeah, lots of interesting questions there. Many. I took a lot of notes as well. Happy to discuss further when I meet you in purpose. That was just a few basic questions I had, and yeah, I look forward to hearing your views.
Okay, thank you very much for raising those points. Maybe very quickly, because maybe 30 seconds for each presenter, 1 minute max to respond. Maybe first Takis.
Yes, thank you very much. Very quickly about the methodology and whether we can introduce qualitative dimensions into our work. Yes, that's something that we have thought about it, doing interviews, interviewing decision makers at the local level. However, we already have a qualitative dimension in our work, because this left-to-right index comes from a quantitative/qualitative analysis of political platforms of political parties. So there is also a qualitative element in this process. Just very quickly, that's my response.
Thanks, Giovanna.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your comments. A lot of food for thought to further deepen the study. About the good governance, this is an extremely good point. So we did not observe precise indicators about good performance, but this would be definitely something that is needed to be added. It would be another nice element to add in the analysis. We try to plot so at spatial level, so to see whether maybe it was focused, so the extension also to spatial patterns would be an interesting development of this work following your line. Then about the measurement of efficiency, so we mostly relied on this literature on efficiency measures. So for example, the way of approaching this study is the same as one of the report of the European Central Bank, where they have in mind that this concept of efficiency, where you are efficient if given the input that you use is, for example, expenditure, you're providing the most of the services, or vice versa, given what you offer, you're using the least of the resources. And then we use frontier methods to estimate this relationship. But then, of course, any input from you and the stakeholders would be very much appreciated. So any further comments would be a lot appreciated. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Then we go to German.
Very quickly, my view on the dynamics of private versus public is that privatization in water was not as important as in other services. In the early 2000s, because of disappointment, remunicipalization gained some space, not overcoming privatization. Then it had a push because of the financial issues in the post-2010 period. That seemed to be very hot, a tsunami coming. And then since 2015, it's gone down, does not disappear. So overall, remunicipalization has acquired maturity as a potential alternative to bad results from privatization, but it didn't overcome privatization. Mm-hmm. But I have a question for the next presenter. So we all know that everybody knows that compulsory amalgamations do not deliver, particularly on cost. Your policy, our your policy within our collection does say the same. So why do politicians insist in compulsory amalgamations? When they do not deliver on costs, they might be delivering on other terms. Sorry for being long, but there was a question.
Okay, so
yes,
sorry.
Yeah, I think in terms of the amalgamations in Flanders, what is largely at play is that, first of all, at a certain point, the discussion here has detached a bit from municipal amalgamations being a tool to reach a goal of being more efficient and have become the goal in itself. And that's also linked to actually the question of Vasileios, because why do rural areas tend to merge more here? It's because like the correct answer is in principle because these municipalities are typically smaller and have more to gain from amalgamating with each other and increasing efficiency. But because of the fear of also amalgamations being made compulsory in the future, they tend to merge with each other in order not to be merged with a large city in the near future, because when we come to the argument of losing identity, etc., it's thought that rural amalgamations are better to protect rural identity, so to say, whereas if rural municipalities are merged with a large city, they're absorbed and they don't have sufficient critical mass in that larger administrative entity. So that is at least the case in Flanders here.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm afraid that we have to leave it here for now for discussion, because then we have like 5 minutes break. And then after this 5 minutes break, we can come back. Hope to see you all in 5 minutes. So let's meet here 2:20, and then see you then for the next round of presentations and discussions. Thanks a lot.